I'm so excited about this. But thank you so much for joining me, Leighann, for the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to meet you. And I love that this is the first time that we're really getting to connect face to face. And it's awesome. I can tell it's
Power
going to
of
be awesome.
technology, right?
I know. Forever
So
in its
cool.
debt.
I'm really excited to, we were talking just before we pressed record, and I was like, stop, because I do this every time. Nearly every single episode, I've had like one of the best conversations, and I was like, well, we haven't pressed record yet. So I stopped you because I wanted to press record because we were getting into some really good stuff. And you have experience in working with people, and of course your own experience in grief, right?
Yeah, so grief is actually the thing that I help people with on the side. That has nothing to do with my job. That's like a passion project for me because it's close to my heart.
Wow. And so what is grief to you?
Great question. Grief is all of the unfathomable emotions and processes that come with someone in your life passing away. Yeah. Grief is realizing a new relationship to life. Grief is understanding a new relationship to the person who passed. But it also is different for everyone. And it completely depends on who you've lost to. The first thing, though, that I should say about grief that I believe is that there are no rules. There's no way you should do it. And grieving is entirely individual. So I think that's the most important thing to me that people know I believe about grief is that however you grieve is perfect. While I stand for people, having healthy resources and getting the support they need, ultimately, yeah, there are no rules.
Yeah. As you were saying this, I felt my heart just be super tender. Like it brought up a bit of, like I felt your words hit me in the heart. And it reminded me of even grief being death as a metaphoric thing, right? Like not necessarily even having to lose someone, but I know I've experienced moments of grief when I've had to let go of something that was really hard, or let go of a relationship that felt like a death, or let go of a business that felt like a death. Like these types of things bring up stuff. And I think perhaps in the past I've had this idea that grief comes from when somebody passes, and I didn't allow myself to feel the emotion of grief when I was losing other things in life. And I think, what happens if we don't process grief? Like what happens if we don't allow ourselves to go through that process?
It bites you in the ass later, for sure. And that's a really good point, because you can grieve pretty much anything, whether it's the loss of a job or like a relationship, even if, you broke up rather than somebody passing away. If you were an athlete, but then you blew your ACL and you have to, say goodbye to the sport, you can grieve in so many different ways. So if you don't process it, I think one of the most prominent things that happens is that you feel a lot of guilt for a very long time. So going unaddressed, grief is always accompanied by guilt for some reason or another, whether it's, it should have been me, like, why wasn't I the one? Or I should have paid attention to the signs, maybe the health, maybe if I had, had him go to the doctor more, or, I'm starting to feel joy again in my life, even though I lost this person. Is that okay? Like there's so many different situations in which guilt is brought into grief. That was one of the things that I noticed the most. And I remember giving a talk. I gave a couple of talks about 5 months after my fiance died. And I remember a woman coming up to me who had lost her husband 12 years prior. And she said, I still feel guilty about wanting to live life happily. I still don't know how to date. I still worry about XYZ. And I think when you don't handle your grief, you sort of bury the happinesses of life that are your birthright. Like they sort of get sacrificed. That's one of the main things that I see.
Wow. And so what happened in your journey? Like, how did you discover this way of grieving, and how did you get through the process of doing that yourself?
Right. Well, I'm really lucky that I was already an ontological coach. So coaching in general, awesome profession, but I'm definitely biased towards ontological methods.
Which
So,
is what specifically?
so it's the study of beingness and existence. So literally, like what shows up in a room when you do, and like your beliefs and where you come from, impacting how you show up, how you be, your patterns, your survival mechanisms. And kind of like you mostly do life with patterns and survival mechanisms anyway. Most people think that, we have these great personalities and like these, the way that I am, when really like so much of it is patterns. But being able to be aware of that kind of thing because of my job first helped me be able to, throughout my process, go, wow, okay, where am I engaging in this kind of pattern? Okay, where am I doing this old thing that I used to do? Oh, wow, look at what's coming up here. I can really notice X, Y, Z. So it was just constantly being in the state of noticing and owning what my humanity was up to. And I also made sure that there were a couple of people whom I really trusted. So I had a spiritual mentor at the time. He's still my mentor, but I remember the day that James passed, I called him and I'm like, what do I do? Like, just tell me, what do I do? And he goes, you're not going to like it. And I'm like, just give it to me. And he goes, this is your call into a new level of womanhood. Do you accept? And from there, it set this precedent like, oh, my grief journey isn't just about loss. This is about like a sort of becoming. This is about an up-leveling. This is about me accepting becoming more of who I'm supposed to be.
Was
And
this an unexpected thing that was
yes.
that came? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, we had just flown to Thailand to work with a client. We were going to lead an intensive for a client. And the morning after we arrived, the client was supposed to arrive in a few hours. And my fiance we were in the pool together, and he like was just wanting to calm his nerves, and he used to be a diver in the military. So he loved like just being in the water and kind of holding his breath and stuff like that. And I remember he kept being like, just give me some space. And I'm just trying to calm my nerves. And I turned around for a couple of minutes and turned back around, and he was at the bottom of the pool. And so, like 1 minute, I'm like this 25-year-old, like successful, happy, like have my soulmate with me. We're about to work with this billionaire client, like on top of the world, literally on top of a mountain in a private villa in Thailand. And then all of a sudden, like, boom, he's gone. And then catastrophe ensued. It was crazy. And so it was really unexpected. And I had the rug pulled out from underneath me pretty harshly. But I called Teo right away and was like, hey, in what context do I need to receive this? Like, how can I be with this? Who do I need to be in this? And he was a huge beacon for me about how to also not make it all about me. Like, grieving sometimes can become all about the person who lost rather than the person who left. And he would remind me like, hey, you want to be sad on Christmas because James passed? Like, that wasn't his fault. Like, use this time to connect deeper with the people who are still here. Like, don't, so it is really refreshing to surround myself with a few people who didn't buy into the total tragedy of it. Like, they were able to speak to me still, like they still had the audacity to call me up and have it be something that created beauty, as well as just having to go through the crap.
And that's beautiful, because like I have a client at the moment that's going through a lot of grief, right? And she's kind of confused with not even wanting to go. Like, she's come to me now, but it's been a year since she even wants to leave the house. She's almost like doesn't know the steps in order to get past the guilt and then start to grieve in a healthy way to be able to leave the house and have these deeper connections. And we're having a really similar conversation recently. But I guess, like, you being in that situation, you would know like how hard it is at times to actually want to do that or want to face the world without that person.
Yep. I think, I just want to know, does this client of yours have anybody else that she's talking to?
No.
Yeah. So the other thing about that is, like, you need somebody who can make it normal for you. Like, I love talking to people who have grief, because when they share with me the things that are going on for them, they're sharing it as though it's awful, or like, oh, I hope you can handle this, or I hope you're still in your chair by the end of me finishing this sentence, because it must be so ridiculous or so unrelatable. And I'm here to go, yeah, you know what? Me too. Normal. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, like that's what you do. And normalizing everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people need to hear, because usually when you have, also my loss was just, when you're 25, you lose your fiancé. Like, not a lot of people go through that. So really nobody knew how to relate to me at all. Like, nobody knew, if I had, knock on wood, like, lost one of my parents. I know quite a few more people who've lost a parent. Somebody could have related to me with that. But I was in a unique situation where nobody knew the exact flavor of support that I might need or be able to anticipate that. So when you can find somebody who gets it and can normalize it for you, that's important too.
Yeah. And so we were talking before around your process being so in the logical mind, which is what we, often refer to as the masculine or the alpha or the that logical minded part of us human beings.
Yeah.
And so where did that lead you? How did that start, kind of the beginning of that journey of grief?
Right. So, definitely one of my, every time somebody has a survival mechanism, like a key trait of theirs that is like fundamentally to survive, we all have different ones. Like, you hear about the people who are like the class clown. That's a great survival mechanism. Every survival mechanism also has a gift. So I'm super analytical, with my clients. It's great. It's a gift for sure. With my partner, not so much. It is definitely a survival mechanism. So there's a gift and a darkness to our patterns, but I noticed that I was trying to do grief, like constantly analyzing, like, how can I do this the best way? Or what did it mean? Or like, well, he used to have a lung problem. Like, what about this? Did this happen? And what about a pulmonary? Ugh. So I was just analyzing, but it was so that I didn't have to feel. Like, I got eventually, after a few months, I was like, this is a brilliant tactic for me to not have to move past my head and into my heart or to my body. And about 8 or 9 months after he passed away, I had been traveling the world, and I ended up in Europe, and I was in Berlin. And I met my trauma counselor in person for the first time, because when he first passed away, I met this trauma counselor from Berlin, And I got to stay with her at her place, meet her, hug her. It was amazing. And then she said, have you started doing your body work yet? And I was like, she's like, you're not just holding grief like in your emotions, you hold grief in your body. Like you should see a body worker. And I know just the person, like, let me call her. She's local. So she calls this woman who is leaving on a trip the next day. And the only time that she can do an appointment is tonight in an hour. And I've just arrived to Berlin. And so I'm like, okay, all right. Like, give me one of your bikes. I'll just cycle over there. And so I like get on this bike and I cycle over the cobblestones to this big wooden door. I walk in and there's this like little woman, and she brings me onto her table and she has me lie down on her table. And she's got this thick accent. She's like, you need to cry for me right now. And I was like, okay. So then I just start crying. I start channeling the grief. I'm like, it's still really fresh at this point, so I can cry on demand, no problem. And after a moment, she goes, you're crying only with your face. And I'm like, is there another way for you to cry? And she goes, yes, you need to cry like a woman, not like a child. And I was like, what is the difference? I'm like laying there crying. I'm like, what do you mean? And she was like, you're in between your eyebrows and your face, you're so scrunched up. You're making your face be a notification that somebody needs to come and help you. Like mama needs to come and help you. Whereas a woman cries with her body, cycles her pain through her body and feels all of it. And so she was like, you need to cry like a woman. And so I'm still laying there crying, and she keeps like touching my face and going like, no, send it to your body. And she's literally like trying to send my crying through my body. And then I start to keep practicing it. And and I think it was like a full hour of doing that. It was exhausting, but it got me to realizing that I need to process things with my body. And that whether it's, I'm pretty sure, like to me, being someone I wouldn't say I'm an expert, because the masculine feminine field of study is just always growing and expanding, and I'm always learning. But the masculine is very logical, right? And so I had to move from logical to like not just emotional, but feeling in general.
Mm. This is mind blowing, and also I can get it I can relate it to my own experience of how I had lived a lot from the masculine shell and that place when it comes to my emotionality and my emotional experience. And, for me, body work is a thing that gets me too. And I remember working recently with a somatic body worker. And,
Nice.
and at this point, my body was like telling me, how much emotion I was storing from the pain I was experiencing, the swelling, like the lymphatic that was blocked, like the weight that I was gaining. Like I was getting all of the physical signs, right? And I just couldn't move it through my body because I was numb, or I was going into what you were doing, where I was logically like trying to fix everything, right? Or I was justifying everything. Like I would look at the situation that maybe I felt hurt or pain, and I would justify it. I was like, oh, okay, well that's happening because of this, and that they're like that, and blah, 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 blah. And I wasn't just allowing myself just to experience the feeling, like going, like that hurt, like, and this is why, and now I'm just going to express. And so I was working with her, and she said that exact thing to me. She was like, you have a really strong masculine shell that's angry, and beneath the anger is this feminine essence that is hurt and just wants to be seen and just wants to let out emotion. It's time to let it out. And so we worked, and I was like, after that one session with her, everything felt different. But it's true, like we kind of would numb ourselves off from emotional feeling because of the unknown, of what it's going to bring up, of whatever. And so in that, what happened for you when you got into your body? And also how, like, what was the practice of you moving from crying from just your face to actual full body? Like, what did you feel the difference?
I just had to think about every single limb one at a time, and I had to think about the energy, like actually just imagine it, visualize it going through my body, and think about all of the different body parts it was flowing through. I pictured it as like a flowing energy, kind of like waves crashing back and forth. And I eventually began practicing upon this woman's request. That when I started to cry, like because grief comes in waves, right? Anytime I noticed I needed to cry, it's not going to release if I'm just crying with my face. So she said, when you start to cry, stand up, or while you're sitting, sway back and forth, or move, or even lightly start to dance. And then that was when I started to get more curious about, like, I danced as a kid, but for me, it brought me back to the curiosity about dance and that kind of movement. Like, I've been a yoga teacher for a long time, but that yoga is also quite masculine because it's also all about stillness in some ways. So with dance, I actually practiced like slowly swaying and dancing as I would cry. And I would imagine that like cycle looked ridiculous, but I mean, that's why I did it for myself. But yeah, it was, I still do it. And
I think like, do you think it to an extent it's like allows you, because I experience the same, and I know when I'm wanting to feel emotion, or I'm really wanting to go deep into it, I allow, it's almost like I allow the breath to flow through my body that just automatically allows a flow to take place, like a rock or a sway, or, you know, it tends to fall into movement. Like it tends to just, I just like intuitively move because it allows me to feel so much more deeply, and it allows emotion just to come up, you know, like I could be
yeah.
absolutely fine and I could start to go into a really beautiful dance or movement. And then all of a sudden I'm crying. I'm like, whoa. And it just allows emotion to come out. Why do you think that is? Like, is it just do you think it's for all, or do you think it's more of a woman's approach to accessing more feminine?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. Was the question also kind of like, would men go through the same process?
I
Is that a
wonder.
question that you have?
Yeah. Like, I guess it's movement. I guess the first part is like movement allows us to access a deeper part of ourselves somehow that allows emotion to come out. And is that because when, as a woman, we are more, you know, in that flow state, or would you think it would be the same for men as well?
I think it's the same. I've seen it. I definitely have also, I even have been to dance workshops where there'll be the odd guy and it'll be the exact same process. Like we'll be moving and he'll be having a really similar experience. Can I speak for him? Not necessarily. But from what I witnessed, yeah, it can be totally the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. And I think before I sidetracked you, I think you were talking about how you were really getting into the flow of moving from crying from your face into your body, and then what that felt like, what the difference felt like.
Yeah, well, it made me remember my mentor's words from the first day that I was going through it, you know, like, this is your call into a new level of womanhood. I thought about that. And I thought about how, okay, this is another dimension. This is happening. It's happening. This is another moment, another layer. And it felt like complete foreign territory and home at the same time. Because you're coming home to your body, but most of us go wildly disconnected from our bodies for entire lives, but it is our home. So it's not that I was disconnected, it was that like I got to connect to it in a completely different way, see it in an entirely new light. But it was my home already. Yeah.
What does it feel like to feel like home in your body?
Hmm. I think home is possibly one of the hardest words to describe on its own. Um, huh. How do I answer that?
Hmm. Because it's almost like it's just this, like I feel like I don't even have words either. It's just this tender feeling that I feel in my heart. Like it makes me want to cry, like when I'm talking about it, because it feels like nothing I've experienced in life. It's just like, oh, like
I
it's like
think
a
for
peace. It's
me,
like peace.
yeah, it's peace. All my muscles relax,
Yeah.
like all muscles sort of melt towards the floor.
Mm.
Um, and there's like this comfortable heaviness in between
Mm-hmm.
my eyes, kind of like kind of like at the end of a yoga class, if somebody puts um, like a little bag over your
Oh
eyes to
yeah,
prevent
yeah.
from the light.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of like, but it's therapeutic, like
Mm-hmm.
put it out over your eyes.
It feels
Um,
safe as well, right?
yeah, it feels like, like unshakable.
Mm.
Like from that place, you are unshakable.
And so how do we get to that place, even though we've experienced grief, or we're experiencing things that we don't want to experience in life, we're not happy where we are, we're feeling disconnected from life, stuff's going on, right? We look around, like life happens, shit happens. And so how do we feel home in our body whilst that's going on?
Mm. Well, one of the things that typically happens is we don't want to be in our body because we want to be distracted. When painful things happen, we want to distract ourselves, whether it's with Netflix or with somebody else's problems or with some pattern that we've got. Yeah, we just really don't want to feel it, and that means we don't want to be in our bodies too. So I think honestly, it first starts with just noticing that,
Mm.
and then noticing and just challenging yourself to be with it. I mean, I really wanted to lean into it. Like when things really break my heart, I just straight up lean into it because I don't want it to come and bite me in the ass. I just want to feel it.
Mm.
And so I've intentionally kind of always just like thrown myself into feeling it. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I
Did that
love
answer your
that.
question?
Yeah, I love it. And I think like that's part of the reason why this podcast is the way it is, because I believe you have to go in to get out. And it's meaning like moving toward the thing that we're often an avoidant to, or afraid of, or don't want to feel, because it's like, you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you have to go through it. You know what I mean? Like that song.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and I think there's just so much fear around moving through the thing that feels so scary, because we don't know what's on the other side of that. But
Mm.
it's like, well, then what's the other option? And if you didn't move toward it, if you didn't move toward your grief, what do you think would have happened instead?
Well, um, so in life, things either use things or they use you. So for me, I use my grief to get present to the urgency of life, to have amazing relationships. Like I use it. But if I didn't go through it, it would be using me. I would be used by it. It would be running the show. It would be making my decisions for me. It would be, like it would be using me. The odd moment, it definitely does. I still sometimes get nightmares and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's just that's a process.
Mm-hmm.
But you can use it or be used by it.
Mm.
So
So I love so much that you've accepted and you've chosen to allow it to initiate you more into womanhood. How can we live like that more? Like, how can we look at things that are maybe challenging to us in life and use it as an up leveling into womanhood? Because I love that so much, that kind of
mm.
concept of like, it's an initiation of sorts. So what does that mean for you? Like, what does it mean that you've been up leveling into womanhood?
Okay, so a couple questions there that I heard. The first one was, okay, well, yeah, how do I up level into womanhood? But also, how Ooh, what did you say? It was so good, but it was like in a stew of a bunch of other things. Um, it was
It's like an initiation of sorts.
the initiation, yes, but it was actually something else. Oh, how do we live like this in our everyday lives when
Uh-huh.
pain happens? How do we keep living like we use things rather than being used by it? So grief, like anything, is something that creates upset. So upset is the general state of like, you know, something that you don't want. You're either crying or mad or something. Like we all know what upset is, right? And then there's not upset, which is usually like joy or contentment. But there are only three sources of upset ever: an undelivered communication, a thwarted intention, or an unmet expectation. So in this case, I had all three. So an undelivered communication, I didn't get to say goodbye to James. Thwarted intention, the intention of marrying and then spending the rest of my life with him, that definitely got thwarted. Unmet expectation, pretty obvious. Also something along the lines of spending the rest of my life with him, running a great intensive, things like that. All those three things occurred, and then I had an upset. So we either have those on a small scale or a big scale. You think about like if you're in an environment at work where it's pretty passive aggressive, that's upset given by a bunch of undelivered communication. So whether it's big or small, those are the three sources of upset. And so when you get that, it's like, okay, there's something in life that I wanted that's not happening. And when you can be with that's the case, you can relate to it as reality, because there's what is and there's what you hoped for or wanted. So what is, interacting with what is, interacting with reality, what's so, the facts. That's where you get your power. That's how when you interact with reality, that's when you live your most powerful life, just dealing with what's so. Otherwise, you're living in interpretations, imaginations, story you make up, and wishes and hopes and stuff like that, which is not powerful. So once I think for everyone, like when you're going through pain, notice, okay, is it an undelivered communication, a thwarted intention, or an unmet expectation? Is there anything I can do about any of these things? If not, okay, like notice it for what it is. And then from there, you get to choose who you want to be about it. For me, one of my questions was always, how am I going to want to look back on this? Like, am I going to be proud of doing it this way or doing it this way? And what will be serving the future me? Like I was just always trying to be mindful about how I was doing pain. And I think that bringing mindfulness to it and awareness is one of the biggest superpowers that you can possibly bring to pain. And the other thing too, like this, a little bit of survival mechanism, but also totally essence. I had to turn it into something beautiful. I didn't want to sit still with it for too long, just being this horrible tragedy. I also really wanted to turn it into like, how can I make a legacy for James, and how can I bring this to other people's lives? How can I make other people's lives better? I didn't want to sit with it for too long. And so it's kind of like this balance of, when do I allow myself to sit with the grief and the pain? And then also, when do I want to just have this be part of me being of service? How do I integrate this into me being of service in the world? So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And that's, I love the question. Like, if I was to look back on this, is this how I would like to, see myself? I love that question, because I think sometimes, like you said, we can get caught up in the imagination and the stories and the things, and then we live in that place, and it's like, isn't really serving us in how we want to be, like, and I think that's a really beautiful question just to land on when we are experiencing that. And so how did it initiate you then into the next woman, or into another level that you have never experienced before?
I definitely discovered a new level of self-awareness. Like it thrust me into, maybe also because of my previous training and my job, but it thrust me into really having myself under a magnifying glass. And that creates, if you choose, a higher level of responsibility. And I think that part of womanhood is responsibility for who you are. And there was a new birth of how badly I wanted to serve the world. Like, I knew that I'm love already. Like, I already knew I'm love, I'm of service, that's what my life is about. But it hit me eventually, like, there is a whole new magnitude of love I have for the planet, for people, for myself, for, like, you know, also being a yogi, remembering, like, service is the greatest pleasure. It's the greatest joy to be of service, to be lost in service. And I kind of fell into that so much more deeply. And to me, I think that is, I wouldn't necessarily make that distinctly woman or man, like female or male, to be of service. But I know that that played into just how I hold myself as a woman. And of course, coming into my body more, like, and challenging myself to not just be analytical and really feel and move through. And honestly, I mentioned before dance, like, dance brought me back to a whole other relationship to my body too. Like, I remember a few years ago, I was taking private dance lessons, and my instructor, he was teaching me these moves, and I kept looking down while I was doing these moves. And he's like, no, 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 look up at me. Show me who you are. Be proud to show me who you are while you're dancing, rather than, like, shying away. And to me, dance shows you how comfortable you are in your body. It will reveal to you how comfortable you are in your body. And so it revealed to me the comfort level that I used to be at. And now, like, seeing me just, like, throw it down any chance I get, and, like, totally unabashedly, unapologetically in my body and just dancing, like, to me, that was another huge component to me just owning my womanhood. But again, it's
I
not.
totally agree. Like, I have so much respect for that, because of the way I've always loved dance. Like, growing up, you know, I loved dancing as a kid and, you know, all of that stuff. And then I went through, when I was wanting to be a performer, I went through a really bad injury and I had to stop dancing. And so getting back now into dance, where you could find me, like, 99% of chance you look at me and I'm dancing, like, I will dance anywhere. But now I do it as a deep healing strategy, because, or modality, because I had to do so much healing from when I stored a lot of emotional trauma and experience in my body and didn't allow it out. And dance has been one of the most healing things that have brought me back to my feminine essence, brought me back to my body, brought me back to the confidence in the self-love and all of the layers. And it still to this day is the thing that will, the go-to thing for me. It I don't know what it is, and it doesn't matter if it's more of a sensual one or out there, upbeat, like, you know, fun, whatever. It's the thing that I can strip back everything and just reconnect to who I am, and it allows whatever needs to come out. And it's the most beautiful journey. And I've allowed myself to be seen in it, which felt challenging at the start and really freaking vulnerable. But now it's just like this, it heals on so many levels.
It so does. And I feel you. It is my number one thing. It's funny when you say, like, any type of dance, because I used to, with my previous partner, I used to teach country dance with him, and like line dancing and two-stepping. So he'd be, like, flipping me up in the air, and I'd be, like, swinging around on his shoulders and doing all this crazy stuff. And it was very, like, you know, country dancing has a totally different vibe, but it was still such a reconnection. And then, you know, like, I also used to dance a lot of salsa, but then this time it was like, wait, how does your body want to move? So it was kind of more like ecstatic dance or conscious dance, which, you know, previously I had some, like, internal dialogue about that and some judgments about that. But now it's, like, my favorite thing ever.
And so many judgments. I remember, like, this year I had been getting more into ecstatic dance, intuitive dance, and letting it flow through my body and my cells and blah, blah, blah. And I remember like just putting up a post on social media, which a year ago, if I was to see someone do that, I would have had all of the judgments. You know what I mean? I would have been like, oh my gosh, why are they doing that? Why is she doing that? She's just looking for attention, blah, blah, blah. Like all these things. But I was like fully embodied, put it up because I had a message to share about it. And I had one of the most beautiful connections with a friend because she was like, she was avoiding me. Like I could pick up on this thing of like her avoiding me. We were supposed to hang out, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we ended up catching up and she was like, I have to tell you something. Like I've been avoiding you because your posts that you're posting are triggering me. I was like, right, explain. And she was like, the post you put up today around you dancing or sexually. And I had all these thoughts and these judgments and, it was like, oh my gosh, I was the one that was eye rolling and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, and then I watched it 5 times and I read what you said 5 times. And then I went, oh shit, it's not you, it's me. And it's like my avoidance to my own body and my own feminine that I'm avoiding the most. And I'm sharing that story because it's exactly what the process that I've been through of the judgments that I've had or the triggers that I've had from seeing this in other people of how comfortable they are in their body and the emotion that's coming out that I wasn't ready to experience at that time. And now knowing how transformational it can be and how beautiful it can be to go to that place of sharing that and then having this beautiful conversation. Like I loved that she just shared that and she didn't shy away from it or run or just not talk to me. She was like, hey, this is showing up for me. Mm-hmm. So it can bring up so much.
Yeah, totally. I think the other thing too is I hear, at least just with women, I maybe there's some version that's akin to this with men, but I think women either get triggered because they aren't like they're not ready for that level with their bodies, or I think that there is also like some sort of precedent for women that we need to always be really sexy and we need to know how to be sexy. And so like if you know how to be sexy but the woman next to you is like, I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but society's really expecting that of me, then that would totally put a damper on wanting to learn how to dance. I think that that's a huge factor.
But do you think like through just even behind closed doors, right? Like in your own space, just connecting to your breath and allowing your body to move, you find it? Because even now, like I could be in a rigid, state, like feeling like, ugh. And then I'll go, okay, I'm going to dance for 30 minutes because I know that's sometimes what it takes for my nervous system to relax and whatever.
Yeah, and me too.
Like, the first song, I could just be like, not even moving. I could just be like, like I'm just, like I feel, I'm fully just not there, not connected. But then you're just allowing it. By 30 minutes in, I'm just like, oh, like so like in it, and it's feels sexy, and I don't know what it looks like, but it feels good where it didn't at the start. So sometimes it's even like moving through. Like I was working with my teachers on this, and they were saying like, do it for it was like 22 minutes. Like the thing that I had to do was like 22 minutes of nonstop movement and dance. And I was thinking in my head, like why would I do it for that long, And then I realized why, because it takes you on this journey of like softening and opening further and further. And so sometimes you just need to kind of be awkward for a bit, like be awkward and do it and see what happens.
Yeah, but think of how many people were somewhere along their childhood or their upbringing did not feel like that was even allowed or an option, or they weren't lovable if somehow they did it the wrong way, or like we all come from a different past around that. And I think that left to your own, you can definitely find it, but it's all about also where you come from, because that dictates your beliefs, which dictates your patterns, your behaviors, what you think you can expect from the world and what you think the world expects from you. So I think it's just about like, if somebody has a difficult time with that, it's about meeting them where they're at, getting in their world about it, and then inviting them. Like, oh, I actually invite you to try this on, see what it's like. Give up maybe these other beliefs that kind of suck. And
in your experience, is this a form of changing the patterns or changing the beliefs that have been ingrained in us?
As opposed to what?
Like, is this a form that people can use, or is there something deeper that they'd also need to do to really change a pattern?
I don't think it's like a like X or Y. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's like depth and layers.
Mm.
Like dance could be an amazing instrument for you, but if you have dance and you have like a coach, awesome. Or if you have a coach and you have like a therapist or a workbook, or like the more things that you have that are assisting you, the deeper the breakthrough is going to be, the deeper the transformation is going to run. But it can be changed, I think, with dance. But I mean, honestly, I'm so biased. I think coaching is the best thing in the world, and I believe that it makes so many other things possible, because human beings, we can't encounter ourselves. We can try and like see outside of our own thoughts, but unless we get the practice with somebody else, we actually don't know how to do that. And
Yeah.
it's not really in our survival's best interest to do that. Like our brain really would rather us stay in the dark and keep these old mechanisms. So yeah, I think that for me, I was able to have this amazing, deeper relationship with dance because I also had, the ongoing practice of awareness and reflection and understanding and breakthrough. Like those distinctions helped me really, yeah, deepen my relationship to what dance was providing me.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you find now like that you've I want to call it like a full body cry, like a full you now that you've fully feeling embodied, feeling deeply, allowing the grief and everything to flow through you fully embodied. Do you find that you feel more, like feel more deeply, like and feel more than you were feeling before? Like it
Yeah.
unlocks things. And is it harder and how do you deal with that?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, I think I live closer to life and death, which helps me feel the human experience more intensely. And I don't think I have a problem with that. I think other people have a problem with that. So me, I'm like, yeah, I do feel deeply. I do live with urgency. I feel my emotions with urgency. I feel it passionately. I feel it hard. But to me, like owning that gives me a certain power and facility with that. Like I have ease with that because I own it. Whereas other people get really uncomfortable. Like, if something comes up and I'm like, yeah, well, you know what? Like you could die tomorrow. Like, what do we want to do? Or how do we want to feel? Or what's the outcome we want? Some people will be like, oh, don't get so heavy. And I'm like, that is strange, isn't it? Like, like it's just the truth. It's just what's so.
Yeah.
Like I'm a little closer to it. I've seen it. And um it's not heavy. To me, it actually can be super enlivening. Like, or just, it's a wake up. And yeah, it's not really about if it's hard for me. It's more if other people are uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think like I walked in the house the other day to my mom and she was like, so you know how you do all this work? Like, why is there still more? Like, why do you still feel more? And I'm like, whoa, like it's like it's almost like that onion layer and it gets deeper and it gets harder, but it gets more, like you said, enlivening and like fulfilling and like you feel more deeply, but I wouldn't have it any other way. But I guess sometimes it's like allowing just allowing is the word. Like the more that I allow myself to feel and the more that I allow myself to go, like whatever, like it's almost like you're like in your own little space of it doesn't matter what anyone else is going through, that's their journey too, and staying in your own space and getting inspired by death. Like I think I had this conversation with Nick, who you know as well, and we were talking about
Mm, yeah, it definitely inspired me
that.
for sure. Yeah, it inspired me and it also challenged me. Like it was even interesting, like how I chose to live my life. Like I wanted to travel the world and I wanted to do all these things. And some people were like, what are you talking about? Why aren't you like at home doing nothing? And why aren't you like, you seem fine? And meanwhile, I'm like crying inside, but I'm like, no one can support me. I don't want to be vulnerable. Um, but yeah, like there were even people like judging how I did grief. And I was like, wow, this is a real challenge as somebody who's like a recovering people pleaser. Like, how do I just follow what I believe I need, what feels good, what feels right, and do it anyway. So in that way, it was also kind of inspiring to own that.
So for people that are going through grief right now, or feeling grief, or avoiding feeling grief, what kind of advice would you have for them?
Talk to me. um, Honestly, I would say find somebody who is still like a bit ahead of you. Like, don't talk to somebody who also just lost somebody. I mean, you could if that really does float your boat. Because again, there are no rules. But talking to somebody who knows grief, the same kind of grief as you. If you lost your spouse, talk to somebody who lost their spouse. If you lost your dad, talk to somebody who lost their dad. Um, just like really creating that normalcy, and talk to somebody who has no judgments at all whatsoever. Be super compassionate with yourself, and know that like however you're handling it is okay, it's normal. And the other thing too I would advise is how do you honor the person you're grieving? How do you honor them? Like, what would actually honor them? Like, would it honor them for you to be isolated, or would it honor them for you to be like do something in their name, like a foundation? Would it honor them to, I'm writing a book that's also for James. So like you can choose a way to honor them, but don't ever have it sacrifice honoring you. That comes first.
Mm. And
Yeah.
what support do you have for somebody who's in the supporter seat to somebody going through grief?
Sorry, I didn't understand what.
Like what would you say for somebody who's in the supporter seat of somebody else going through
Ah,
grief?
great question. I was actually talking with Nick about this as well. So I think a couple of things. One, start to explore what your own boundaries are around it, what you're available to be of service for and what you're not, and be lovingly straight about it. Another thing is use it as an opportunity for you to deepen your own relationship with life, for you to deepen your own listening skills, being present. Like if you support somebody through grief, like it's just another opportunity to become a better human, and step into a deeper experience of life and a deeper experience of connection and of support. Um, hmm. Also, I would put yourself in their shoes and ask what you might need, because people who are grieving, I don't think they know what to ask for I didn't know what to ask for what I needed. I didn't even know what I needed. And so what I say is give people options to the person who's grieving. Like, hey, do you want to cuddle? Do you want me to make you some food? Do you want me to come over and do XYZ? Hey, do you need somebody to do the grocery shopping for you? Would you like me to like do something like clean your room? Or do you want me to take you out to the, Formula One and let's just have a great time? Like give them options, because they're not even going to be able to comprehend what they need. To them, they're just going to want to like probably stay still. So yeah, giving options rather than depending on the grieving person to know what they need.
I love that. And where can people go to see what you're up to and to reach out if they need support, or how can we find you?
Totally. So you can get me on Facebook, Leighann Amanda. You can email me, hello@leighanamanda.com. You can go to my Instagram, leighann.amanda. I'll give you all the links. But yeah, Instagram, email, Facebook, those are the best ways to get me for sure.
Sweet. I'm going to link that up so people can find you. And is there any last thing you want to share on what we've spoken about today, or on grief?
Let me see. Um, hmm. Hmm. My hope is that grief and death will be something that is not an uncomfortable conversation, but rather is just, it's like talking about the weather. It's there. And being able to, you know, like if it's raining outside, you get a jacket. If you know grief and death are real, what are you going to do? Like, that's just it. And really bringing that like reality. And my hope is that, you know, I can have people have a much more sacred relationship with life once they get more present to death, not from a fear based relationship, like being afraid of death. So I better get on my shit. But okay, this is real. Now what?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing today what you've shared. And, you know, there's something that you said at the start around your work as a coach is how do you show up when you walk into a room? Like, how does the room show up when you're in it? And I can't help but feel like even just being on this Zoom call, like the way that you just show up lights up the room, like, and we're not even in a room, but it makes like, you just like make my heart smile. So you have such a beautiful energy. And I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing in the world and for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much. I thank you for the exact same thing. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for having this podcast. And thank you for being a beam of sunshine. You're just so bright. It's beautiful.
Look at us. Just loving on each other, you know?
Yeah.
No, thank you.